at the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network event entitled Women for Climate Justice, Leading Solutions. My name is Elaine, Colligan, and I'll be moderating this panel. I'm so grateful for your participation today. I'm currently a student of political theory at the University of Oxford in Oxford, United Kingdom, but my background is in organizing for climate justice in the US context. And I want to introduce the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network briefly before we set the stage for our panel and hear from our incredible lineup of women leaders. So this is the 8th Conference of the Parties that WeCan has attended, and it definitely won't be our last. As an organization, we strive to uplift women's leadership on climate justice at all levels, from the grassroots to the UN, because we know that women actually are at the heart of climate solutions. Women around the world are calling out the root causes of climate change and promoting radical, transformative solutions. At WeCan, we seek to promote a comprehensive and intersectional understanding of climate change, which we know stems from a long history of social and political inequality and domination, and the extractivist, colonial, and capitalist logics of exploit, extract, and deplete that have actually led us to this precarious planetary point. We know that our current fossil fuel-reliant economic system is unsustainable for Earth's nearly 8 billion people, and we know that for the sake of the planet and our people, urgent change is needed. The old paradigms actually must give way to a new logic, one of restore, respect, and replenish, in which we live in harmony with Earth's natural systems and with deep respect for one another. And because of this perspective, of course, as Aotearoa has taught us, we know we can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. So women are at the front lines of promoting a new paradigm of living, being, and sustaining ourselves on this planet. And this is why we're so proud to be here at the COP to speak our truth to power and to hold world leaders accountable to the real needs and demands of women across the globe. Of course, the IPCC report that just came out this October was the loudest clarion call from the scientific community that we've had, but we only have 12 years left to really drastically reduce emissions. And we must act immediately to keep global warming to a maximum of 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature rise, which even by half a degree more, the ecological and social consequences would be disastrous. So in this moment of urgency, we're turning to one of the main untold stories of the climate crisis, which is the story of women leading climate solutions. So we know that although women are central to climate solutions, we're also disproportionately impacted by the negative effects of climate change due to unequal gender norms, which can marginalize women's voices, impact women's economic opportunities, rights, bodies, education, and political power. From natural disasters to economic stress to pollution and biodiversity, women experience the impacts of climate change first and worst, but we also have the unique knowledge, skills, leadership, power, and innovative vision to make changes from local energy solutions to protecting natural resources to advocating for rights and dignity in our own communities. And particularly Indigenous women, women of color, and women from the global south are central to these kind of solutions. So we are so eager to highlight and to track the implementation of the Gender Action Plan, which was adopted actually at COP24 under the Lima Work Program on Gender. And we're advocating for a key list of demands, which include ensuring human rights-based language and gender-just implementation language in the Paris Agreement, something we've been tracking very closely this COP, and operationalizing a robust and rights-based platform for Indigenous peoples and local communities. We've also published our call for climate justice and immediate action at the Global Climate Summit in California. I encourage you all to check that out, which included some key demands related to soil, not oil, keep it in the ground, protecting and implementing women's leadership and gender equity and Indigenous rights, promoting energy democracy and rights of nature, and protecting and promoting biodiversity and seed sovereignty. So without further ado, I want to introduce our first incredible woman panelist, Carmen Capriles. She's a feminist, human rights advocate, and environmental defender from Bolivia.
Well, thank you very much. Is this working?
Is the microphone working?
This one? Okay, thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. I know cold morning, but we'll try to bring a little bit of warmth to this room. Well, as Elaine mentioned, I'm a climatic activist, but usually I'm here to talk about the experiences of local women what are they doing on ground, especially in the Andean regions. I come from La Paz, Bolivia. In the last years, there is a problem with whoever wants to take care of the earth. And basically they are human rights and environmental defenders. And if we have seen the news in the last 3 years, let's not go back so far, we have a sense that the activists have been and are being killed as we speak. And usually when we think about harassment to environmental defenders, we think about very certain regimes that we know by name and by regions and so on. But usually the truth shows us that those regimes and those regions that just came to our minds just let it flow. And we cannot let this thing happen. Only in 2017 we had almost 200 human rights and environmental defenders killed in only one region, which is Latin America. So in order to tackle this problem, what we've been working on is in an institutional solution. Because also who are most affected by this persecution, this harassment in the region, in Latin America, are indigenous people. So 2 out of 3 murders are of indigenous people. Because although we have lots of means right now, constituency and so on, and a platform for indigenous voices, those voices don't get to these levels. They just stay on the ground. And if they are a little bit higher, toward companies and transnational companies. Therefore, in the last years, activists from Latin America, we've been working on an institutional solution, as I told you about. Oh, because we also have reports that are telling us, and research that are telling us what's going on and what's happening, and that have like the precise data on who's been killed, why it's been killed, and so on. And I would recommend that you can read, especially these 2 reports if you're in human rights and environmental defenders being harassed and killed. And this is the deadly shade of green, which is by CL, and the other one is a report by Global Witness. And the findings are amazing because it really disrupts everything that we have built under stereotypes, and we can start seeing the real picture. And that's important in order to keep on fighting for human rights all over the world. So what we did in Latin America and the Caribbean is to push for an agreement on Principle 10. Principle 10 of the Rio Declaration. What does adopted in March of this year? And for me, it's really amazing that in this kind of spaces, we're still not talking about this CASU agreement and what the potential that it has and what we must do to push our governments in order to have one. And also some other regions. In some other spaces, I heard that Asia is interested in having an agreement like this one, and also in some regions in Africa. And I want to get a little bit in depth about what this agreement has, because one thing is important is that it's binding, and the second is that it has compliance. Well, the objective basically is to guarantee access right to the population. And in order to have that right being fulfilled, there are some definitions that have been put into the text. One is about environmental information. What advise you to revise. Another definition that carries on is the persons, persons or groups in, sorry, I cannot read from here, vulnerable situations, which relates in Latin America, especially like indigenous people and people who cannot afford to have lawyers and people who their community, their small community is being damaged. That's why it's so important to have a definition for vulnerable groups, because also here for climate change we're talking about vulnerable groups, but still we don't have a definition for what does that mean. The other definition, which is really important to have in this agreement, is human rights and environmental defenders. Because under this agreement, states commit themselves to guarantee human rights to all these people that is fighting for human rights and for environmental issues. So for us, it was one of the most important definitions because it hasn't been done in the UN system before, and now we have a definition for the defenders. And we hope that under this definition, the murders that have been carried out in Latin America will decrease dramatically within the next years. There's no turning back. We're going to have this agreement, whether it's tomorrow or whether it's in 10 years, but it's one of the key tools that we have as activists in order to stop the murders of environmental defenders. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Carmen. I would like to introduce our next speaker, Ruth Nyambura. She's a feminist, organizer, and researcher from Kenya, and we're so excited to have Ruth here with us to speak today.
Hello everyone. I must say that I'm very happy to be here. This is the third time that I've had the immense privilege to speak at a weekend event in the COP. So it means that I've been coming to the COP for at least the last 2 years, and I keep joking to my friends that after my first COP in Doha, I swore that I would never ever step into the halls of the UN building. Where we're told that people are passive and waiting for liberators from the West. But for those of us who come from the global South know that we are constantly struggling to fight authoritarianism both within our countries and that comes from outside of our countries. And my conversation basically is about street politics. I want to talk about streets as our spaces of politics. So let me read this small passage in the book. But street politics has another dimension, in that it is more than just about conflict between authorities and the institutionalized or informal groups over the control of public space and order. Streets are spaces of flow and movement, and not only where people express grievances, but also where they forge identities, enlarge solidarities, and extend their protests beyond their immediate circles to include their known, the strangers. Here, streets serve as a medium through which strangers or casual passerbys are able to establish latent communication with one another by recognizing their mutual interests and shared sentiments. This is how a small demonstration may grow into a massive exhibition of solidarity, and that is why almost every contentious politics, major revolution, and protest movement finds expression in the urban and rural streets, if I may add. It is this epidemic potential of street politics that provokes authorities' severe surveillance and widespread repression. While a state may be able to shut down colleges or to abolish political parties, it cannot easily stop the normal flow of life in the streets unless it resorts to normalizing violence, erecting walls, and checkpoints as a strategic element of everyday. Very many people across the world, it is a matter of life and death. But still, even in this difficult times, people are finding ways to resist authoritarianism. People are finding ways to resist an economic system that is inherently designed to find the majority of us disposable. Majority of us being women, being queer people, being peasant farmers across the global South. Each finds us disposable. And I don't know what more I can add really, apart from the question about we have to conceive our work as a deeply political project. Our work of movement has to be a deeply political project. This is not time to say that we are neutral or we are waiting for to find ourselves in a position where we can bring everyone to the big tent. We have to conceive it as daily political projects, as feminists, as women, as environmental defenders in this particular place. We have to know that our work will be contentious for very many people, and we have to get our minimum non-negotiables together. It is difficult and impossible to assume that all of us conceive of movements and conceive of justice in the same particular ways. We have to build our movements with the aspirations of those on the margins, the rural-urban margins, those on the margins of and the front lines of pipelines across the world, those on the margins and the front lines of coal power plants across the world, those on the margins of corporations, in their territory, whatever. I'm not sure if I can mention corporations, the names of corporations, but I'm not going to mention the name of corporations. I think we know which ones we're talking about. But our movements as feminists, as women, as gone and who are still there, who are still here with us, but the work of organizing is absolutely difficult, but it is the only way that we move forward. And we don't organize with the people who, we don't preach to the choir. I feel that we've sort of gotten to a point as comrades, as friends, where we continuously speak to the same people, and we have the same conversations with the same people, and we think that we will close ourselves in a tent and we will be able to get to that space that we want. But we have to give ourselves to the work of organizing, and not organizing and speaking to one another from a condescending and a patronizing point. We have to abolish that. We do not build movements by being condescending, by being patronizing. So we have to learn the humble and tiring work of speaking to one another, street politics, where we meet each other in the streets and have this serious conversations with one another. And of course also, as many people who've worked in social movements know that there's no straightforward link between social inequalities and political mobilization. The honest truth is that not everyone resists in the way that you think that they're going to resist. And even for us as women, we don't always organize as women. These are things that we need to critically think about in terms of how do we resist. And the kind of feminism that we invoke and the nature of our contestation of social relations remains highly contingent in the spaces that we are. We do know, for example, the different waves of feminism, and those of us from the global south who have whether it's really possible to say that we are fighting for environmental justice if the only thing we seek to do is to move around or benefit from a capitalist system, not that to destroy a capitalist system. Whether we can actually have a movement for environmental justice or climate justice or food justice where patriarchy still stands, where racism still stands, where homophobia, transphobia is still a guiding principle of our movements. Thank you very much.
So much, Ruth. It was so powerful to hear you speak your truth to power just then, so thank you so much. And I think as both Carmen and Ruth have highlighted in this panel, it's incredible to see the international solidarity between women at the UN from the grassroots all the way to Capriles, from the Escazú agreement, which Carmen spoke about. It's so important to defend and protect everybody from Indigenous and environmental land defenders all the way to promoting the street politics that Ruth highlighted, and coming together and speaking outside of the circles that we typically run in and reaching out. And with that, I'd like to introduce our third panelist, Logan-Riley, who is a youth climate leader from New Zealand and is leading a youth delegation delegation now to the UN climate talks. Please, welcome.
It's just a greeting to everyone, and greetings to the land that we stand on, the house that we're in, and to all families present and not present in this room. Hawaii. To Aotearoa, New Zealand, from across the Pacific. What I'm going to speak about here today is just sharing a bit of the stories of women back home, sharing our origins, sharing my experience as a young person in some of these movements, and sort of highlighting some of the teachings that I see back home, which hopefully will have some resonance and opportunities for reflection for those of you here today. And then I'll just round up with some little extra bits of advice or requests, really. So I can't talk about women, I can't talk about gender without naming the origin of who I am as Māori. In our story, Mother Earth Kahungunu gifted the red earth of herself, the most sacred soil, to a child, Tane, who's god of the forests, to craft the first human out of. And he crafted a woman, and her name was Nyambura. And so our first human that walked this planet, that stepped on the mother, was actually a woman. And from her was born Heretaunga, who eventually moved west and became Kahungunu, the goddess of death. So in these stories we note in fact that the women are both life givers and life receivers. And that is who we enter the world through and who we leave the world through. And so when a woman menstruates, we are expressing or demonstrating that if you come from a family that has a history of domestic violence, your child will be planned to be taken off you before that child has even been born. And that rate is much higher for Māori women than it is for non-Māori women. And of course, I can't talk about political agency for women without talking about our right to vote. New Zealand was the first country where women fought and won the right to vote in 1893. So 125 years ago. It's been a really big deal, events across the country back home about it, celebrating it. And this is almost like a slap in the face, because 8 years ago the government passed a law saying that prisoners can't vote. So actually the 125 years stopped 8 years ago, and we still have yet to change that. And given that 60% of the women in prison are Māori, when we're only 17% of the population, a little bit of a like, oh, that's a really clever way of making sure that Māori women can't have political agency, which is then, of course, underpinned by that dehumanizing and that demonizing of us through the history of colonization. It's heavy stuff, it's not such great stuff, but yeah, we've got to have these frank conversations about it. Of course, I can't talk And part of that has involved decolonizing our stories and our histories. So the story that I shared about our mother gifting that red earth is only a story that has started to be told in the last few years. The agency was placed on Tane, the god of the forest. He made the first woman, and there we go. Man was suddenly the creator rather than our mother. And part of that decolonizing is also kind of reclaiming the different gender identities that we had before colonization. And so for myself, that has meant stepping into an identity that we call takatapui, which is basically a catch-all word for anyone who's non-binary or doesn't identify with any of the dichotomies that we've been raised with. So any gender identity, any sexual identity, but what it does is it couches that identity and that experience within being Māori and Indigenous first and foremost. And then what we do with our bits and whose bits we like is completely irrelevant. So yeah, it's been an emerging trend, and it's difficult as a young person in the climate movement because we have some of those old trends of kind of patriarchal dominated spaces feed through into our movements. We're not perfect just because we're aiming for the perfect vision in the future. And I also really like to name that a lot of, in our movement back home, the labour that is done in our movements is very gendered. So women run the movement back home, and basically men run the movement back home, but the majority of paid roles and resource roles are given to men. And that is really upsetting as well, because then we see these members of our community pouring time and energy and burning out in order to be able to give to the movement and keep it going across generations. The last few years have been working towards getting an Indigenous youth delegation to attend the UN climate talks. It's the first one that I know of to be coming to the UN climate talks, and unintentionally they have been largely women or takatapui, which I am very proud about, to be honest. So that is my work. When we go home, we go back into our own respective communities, and we try to carry these safe spaces with us that we've created within our delegation back into the movements that we have. And part of our work moving forward is exploring how do we support our delegation members to be brave in the face of those toxic internal movement dynamics that continuously undermine us in the work that we do. Lastly, I just want to kind of close with an acknowledgement that, we're all here in the room, and probably one of the best things that you can do when you go home is to channel resources and time and support into those people who do so much of that unpaid labour, because they would honour their work and also enable greater contributions and to better look after their families as well, because so often those are the ones who have to go without in order for this work to be done. And I say this because earlier this year I was spending some time with an elder, and we were talking about the dynamics of movement building and how do we get more people into this space. And he talked about the dynamics of our marae, and our marae they're the nexus point of our community identities. So each of our individual identities connecting together into this physical place. We have an ancestral house, and we have a food house, and then our houses are dotted around it. And if we're lucky enough, we get to grow up at that nexus point at that marae. And the elder said that when the aunties put the call out in the time of coming crisis, that will be when it is time for us to return to our marae and defend our Indigenous places. And so I very much urge you to resource those who do that unpaid labour and listen for that call. So when that moment comes, will be when that point of change is about to happen. And it is our aunties who will be the indicator and the communicator of that. Ngati tātou.
culture of your people with us here at the UN. We're so honored to have been the recipients of that knowledge, and just want to thank you so much for that. So our next speaker now will be Aneesa. She is a youth delegation leader for COP24 with SustainUS, a group of US youth advocating for climate justice at the US climate talks, but originally from India. And we're so grateful to have you on our panel.
So, like Elaine said, my name is Aneesa, and my biggest passion is to tell stories of climate justice in creative ways. Women like Arundhati Roy, Maya Sachapi, Fabiana Rodriguez are telling stories, radical stories, through writing and art, and women have always told radical stories through writing and art. But have you ever tried to tell someone about climate change? And have you seen their eyes glaze over, and then you just kind of sit there and you're like, okay, this is something that affects my life every day, affects my family in India, but is a hard story to tell. Art can play a massive role in our movement, and it took me a while to realize that that is where the energy of my policy wonk soul sometimes actually lies. So I wanted to tell you a little bit more about my graphic novel and the experiences of climate activists of color, and how young people are resisting the systems of capitalism and oppression that are tearing us down today. Great. So I was born in India in 1995, but I grew up in Muscat, Oman in the Middle East. The nation thrived almost entirely off of the petroleum industry and extraction. Oil was cheaper than drinking water, almost 10 times cheaper. Living in Oman was a bit of a paradox. We lived in the desert. It was hotter than hot. But as the oil companies took more out of the ground to feed the global hunger for fossil fuels, temperatures in the country soared higher and higher. I'd hear it on the radio every day. There were times during the day where we couldn't go outside because it was so hot you could die. 110 degrees Fahrenheit, 45 degrees Celsius every single day. And I learned about climate change in school, but we never criticized the fossil fuel industry, which we should have been doing. And I was told if I used the right light bulbs and recycle enough, I would do enough to save the planet, which we know is not true. At age 14, I moved back to India, and my interest in environmental issues increased. Living in a country where pollution is so high, there's a lack of water, there are hurricanes in some places, and yeah, it's a hard place to be. And at age 16, I wrote what felt like the longest essay ever. It was 4,000 words, and now that I look back on it, it wasn't that hard of a time. But I wrote it on the topic of the tar sands of Canada and their effects on the Athabascan Chipuyan Nation. And that's when it hit me. Climate change and environmental problems are not just about animals, they're not just about trees, they're about people too. The Athabascan Chipuyan First Nation was being culturally compromised, and their lives and livelihoods were being put at stake just because rich and greedy oil companies wanted to make a profit. So at this point I was like, okay, fossil fuel consumption shouldn't happen at the cost of the innocent. And I decided to go to college at the Atlantic with some alumni in the room here. And was told to be politically radical. In my second week, I met an amazing group of young people called Earth in Brackets. I met Nathan Thankey, who said to me, have you heard about Earth in Brackets? We're a student climate and social justice collective working on political issues like climate change, food, biodiversity, indigenous rights, tar sands, and I was like, okay, I'm in. And every week we learned about a range of environmental issues, but also developing the skills to run campaigns with other activists. But one thing came up at every single meeting: climate justice. The idea that working on climate change requires justice for both people and the planet. Historically, we know that the global north, the rich, and the fossil fuel elites polluted most of our atmosphere to cause catastrophic climate change. But those who are bearing the burden of rising temperatures are unfortunately the most innocent in its causation. They are those from the global south, women, low-income families, people of color, and indigenous people. So now that we're here at the UNFCCC, what would an equitable solution to this look like? Developed countries would reduce their emissions to zero immediately. Then they would give climate finance and technology to developing countries and vulnerable people to help them develop sustainably. And then to save those on the front lines for maximum impact, we would reduce our emissions such that we limit temperature increase to 1.5 degrees. What we've seen in this space is that currently countries' pledges are taking us to a world that is 4 degrees warmer and is absolutely unacceptable. This was a lot for me to take in at age about 18 at the time, and I understood what needed to be done, but just didn't know how to do it. So in 2014, I met Doreen Stavinsky, a professor of global environmental politics, and she said to me a quote from this book by Ronnie Lipschutz called Global Environmental Politics that says, "Environmental politics must involve praxis. Praxis is a Greek word meaning action, but it is action guided by purpose, values, science, and most of all, ethics applied in political context." And I was like, damn, okay. Praxis was what I'd been looking for. I then started coming to the UNFCCC. This is my 4th COP. Every year, though, I saw the same thing, injustice. Global North negotiators saying, we won't reduce our emissions or provide you with finance. Global South negotiators saying, but we have a right to develop as well. You owe us money and technology. This is a debt. And then those of us on the front lines of the crisis saying that we're losing our lives and livelihoods. Every year, I tried my best to say something. In Lima in 2014, in Paris in 2015, in Marrakesh in 2016, but it didn't matter. My voice didn't matter. Nothing I said or did made a difference, and governments continued to fail us. The Paris Agreement of 2015 was a lie. Countries said that they would attempt to limit temperature rise to 1.5 degrees, but their actions are taking us to a 4-degree warmer world. I was heartbroken, depressed, burnt out, and I honestly wanted to crawl into a ball, because how could I ask for system change in a system that won't budge? In 2017, though, something happened to me. I came across a book that Doreen had used in that class and stumbled across this word again, praxis. Structural elements do not fully determine outcomes or eliminate the potential for praxis and the possibility for change. This is important for us to remember. Maybe I was just lost. Maybe I just needed some inspiration. And I thought back on the people I met over the last 4 years, the people on the front lines of the climate crisis, the activists who have been working for decades to fight for all forms of justice, the people who had no choice. And I had much to learn from them, because if they could persevere, then my question is, what is my excuse? And I think that's what brings a lot of us back here. This project focused on telling the stories of climate activists of color. The first one that I just showed you was mine, which served as an introduction to the rest of the book. The second story that I told was that of Nemo Bassey, civil rights and environmental rights activist from Nigeria who has fought Shell along with the Ogoni people in the Niger Delta. Asad Rahman from the UK, who started fighting out against racism against South Asians in the UK and then moved into the environmental justice movement. And Liddy Natko, who started out very young fighting and taking down the Marcos dictatorship in the Philippines, and now who's here alongside all of us fighting for climate justice. Here's a little bit from Nemo's novel. So this is a scene from where the Nigerian government, manipulated by Shell, called in the military to take down the Ogoni people, and where Nemo felt extremely devastated because human rights are not enough, we need to fight for the environment. Those two things go together. And he said something to me that really inspired me. He said, colonialism is continuing today in the form of carbon colonialism. The global north wants to continue polluting, and they want to appropriate our environment in the global south, our trees, our soil, our communities, in exchange for business as usual. And we can't give up because of the crazy things that Trump says. This is about the survival of all living species on the planet. For me, these are the things that inspire me. I'm inspired by the words of these elders, but I'm also here because I organize with young people in the US and because we are a frontline community. I'm here with SustainUS, a group of 14 youth from across the US, and we are here because we are resilient. Young activists have the capacity to create beauty, justice, ecological and community health, and community empowerment, even in spite of the political circumstances being so dire right now. And we are here demanding reparations, because the need for making amends and paying back historical and ecological debts of centuries of colonization and extractive capitalism to communities of color, indigenous communities, ecosystems, and developing nations who are most impacted by climate change and have done the least to cause it. I'm here with an amazing group of people, some of them in this room, Ali and Micaela, gastivists who fight against fracking and pipelines in their communities in Oregon and Colorado. I'm here because I love working with Michael, who fights tirelessly for Indigenous rights in this space and outside it, and who has probably had the least sleep of all of us on this delegation. I'm here because of Vic, who fights tirelessly every day as well, who is suing the federal government in the US based on climate change with many other youth. I'm here because of Garrett, who organizes along with the Sunrise Movement and who has hundreds of youth occupying the US House and telling them that we need a Green New Deal with policies that actually matter. I'm here with Philip, who puts in love and effort into telling stories of Black queer lives in Jamaica. And I'm here as a part of this group that has challenged, motivated, and energized me to be here in this space for one more year, because we are the ones who are on the front lines of climate change, and we are the ones who should be demanding justice. We live in a time of tipping points, as war, racism, poverty, and a plethora of other issues drive society as we know it over the edge. Every single one of these problems is being exacerbated by the worst planetary crisis we have ever faced, climate change. I'm not the first one to feel burned out, nor am I the last. There are thousands of strong people struggling for just causes every single day, and they are here to inspire us, and they are the ones that will keep this going, not the UN, not our federal governments, not the people who are pushing us down. The only way we make it through this is by finding our form of praxis. Thank you.
Wow, what an incredible presentation. Thank you so much, Aneesa, for sharing your art and your artivism with us, and your story of your childhood and how your experiences and your perspective have led you to this point, and just so grateful for your work with the SustainUS delegation and to all the delegates in the audience as well. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce Cynthia Mellon, who is the Climate Justice Policy Coordinator at the Climate Justice Alliance, who's going to share a few words with us. Welcome, Cynthia.
Thank you. Yeah, it's such an honor to be here, and it's such an honor to be here working with SustainUS and the action that we pulled off a couple days ago, telling truth. I don't even want to call it power, telling truth in the face of lies. So thank you to everyone who's been standing up with us all together on that. And I can't wait to read your novels, Aneesa. So my name is Cynthia, and I'm the policy coordinator for the Climate Justice Alliance, which is an organization that currently links 68 member organizations across the US and Puerto Rico. And we are an intergenerational organization. Our constituencies are rooted in Indigenous, African American, Latino, and Asian Pacific Islander and poor white communities all across the country, folks that are on the front lines of the climate crisis. Our organization shared histories of colonialism and racial and economic oppression, along with rich histories of organizing for environmental, economic, and social justice. We believe as CJA that in order to effectively confront the climate crisis, we must transition our priorities from global systems of production and consumption that are energy intensive and fossil fuel dependent to more localized systems that are sustainable, resilient, and regenerative. But to do this, this transition must be just. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the organizations that we're here with, and then talk about praxis among some of our groups. We're here at the COP24 as part of the It Takes Roots delegation, which is composed of 4 big networks: Climate Justice Alliance, the Indigenous Environmental Network, Grassroots Global Justice, and Right to the City, which is a housing group. We all know that we're in a very difficult moment all over the world. In the United States, where we're based, we're seeing the rise of the right. This is happening everywhere. People are experiencing an increase in violence, the violence of misogyny, the expressions of toxic masculinity that are hurting our people. This includes a big increase in state violence manifesting as police violence. One of our militant organizers, an environmental justice leader based in Detroit with East Michigan Environmental Action Council, Siwati Salama-Ra, was unjustly imprisoned for over a year. She gave birth in prison. She just came out and her case is still pending. And this kind of thing is happening all over the country, and it's having a direct effect on us. She's back with her family now, and we're hoping for justice, but her story stands out, but it's certainly not the only one. Much of the feminist work and feminist organizing in our big network is carried out by Grassroots Global Justice, which does feminist organizing with grassroots leaders of color, holds feminist organizing schools, and that work is going to be increasing over the next year as we confront the current situation. So how are we doing our work on the ground? In order to bring about this just transition, we're working in a lot of areas that we know must change. Two that I want to talk about today are food sovereignty and energy democracy. So I thought I would just mention some of the groups, some of the 68 groups that are linked with us, whose work crosses as part of the nexus of food sovereignty and energy democracy, which we're trying to build out. So I thought I'd talk about the Black Dirt Farm Collective, which has members pretty much coming from the South and up into the Detroit area. And their work is very much based on food sovereignty, teaching people how to farm, and the philosophy is that we are returning farmers, that the people were farmers, and that this was taken away from them for a couple of generations, and now they're back. And so working with them has actually been a really great experience, because we have a member group in Puerto Rico, which is called Organización Boricua de Agricultura Ecológica, right? Organization Boricua, which is an agroecology organization that links 135 organic farmers or farmers that are in transition that are small or medium sized. So in the face of the hurricane that took place there, they are leading in what we call just recovery, because when you have that type of tragedy, of course a lot of climate capitalists move in and start to try to take over the situation in the vacuum that is created. So Organización Boricua is working to seek energy democracy and find a way to develop small grid solar on a number of areas. The place was devastated in terms of being able to produce food. The people who were farming in a more sustainable and organic way had, in some ways, fewer losses than people doing conventional agriculture. So Black Dirt Farm Collective and a number of others of our members all went to Puerto Rico in brigades and helped the farmers there. So that was a very powerful experience as we began to help farmers get their fields cleaned up so that they could plant and not miss the planting season. And that was one place where we began to, could really feel the solidarity of our network and of our movement, and trying to take a good hard look at how to influence what that recovery is going to look like. It's not easy to do, but we're working on that. Also in terms of agriculture and women-led sustainable projects, where there's a cluster of groups in the Bay Area and the East Bay and near San Francisco, women-led organizations. I can think of Urban Tilth, Poder. There are others that are teaching folks also how to recover food sovereignty. And they're actually farming and growing, in some places teaching medicinal practices, how to grow herbs, and others are producing food, all in the shadow of these oil refineries that have poisoned people's lives, damaged their health. One of them exploded a few years ago and sent 15,000 people to the hospital. And in the shadow of those refineries, they're not only fighting for energy democracy and to get beyond that, but protecting the communities by developing skills that people need to live better. So that is like a couple examples of praxis that we look to, and when we get the chance, we visit those places and support each other. I also wanted to talk about some of the organizations that are women-led that are confronting energy laws very specifically. The Little Village Environmental Justice Organization in Chicago was able to influence a law that they got there, which is actually headed toward a cleaner energy law, but they made it work very hard to make the law that would support and sustain the low-income environmental justice communities that many of us come from. So they not only were able to be active in the closing down of 2 coal-fired power plants, and they're engaged in the struggle to get those into the hands of people for good projects, but they've taken the law and been able to use that to develop solar panels, a school teaching people how to install and even build solar panels, which is directed at returning people who are leaving prison and youth that aged out of the foster care system. So that is like a very, I hear people cite the work of them sometimes without naming them, but Beco is the one that are leading that, and they are our members. The Asia Pacific Environmental Network, also in the San Francisco area, is doing something similar. They're taking laws that make it possible to get solar energy that usually leave out marginalized communities for a bunch of reasons, and are making that solar technologies available to low-income communities and low-income families. And finally, I want to mention our members, the Black Mesa Water Coalition in Navajo country, who are doing terrific economic justice and environmental justice work, not only developing a solar energy project in the face of 2 coal-fired power plants that are poisoning those communities, but they've also got economic justice projects that are both bringing back traditional agriculture and also helping the wool industry. And they've actually been able to bring value added to the way they're managing their wool business and increase the income. Even in a few years, we're starting to hear that that's been successful. So I just wanted to end on that note, and again, it's kind of tough times in some ways, and yet in some ways we've never been stronger because of who our people are and what we're doing. So thank you all.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, for sharing your work on energy democracy and biodiversity and local community empowerment. We're so grateful to have the Roots delegation here with us at this COP and work with you in partnership, so thank you so much. And now, without further ado, I'll just introduce myself. I'm the last panelist, and then we'll move to questions. So my name is Elaine Colligan. I think I said I'm currently a master's student at the University of Oxford, but I wanted to talk a little bit in my presentation about time and how we think about time in our movements and how our movements interact in such a moment of planetary crisis and urgency with an eye towards the longer time frame and evaluating our success. So I just want to begin by saying that I never thought I would work in US politics ever in my life. I was actually never interested in that. And I only became politically active after having the ability to understand what climate change looked like in fishing communities in Senegal when I was doing research there as an undergraduate. And so I want to talk a little bit about what I learned there and how I've operationalized that back in the US context. And so through Georgetown Center for Social Justice, I was able to get a grant to spend 6 months studying biodiversity and gender-just solutions to climate change in Senegal. And I worked and lived with an incredible group of fisherwomen in the coastal community of Djernda, which is a Serer-speaking village and community located on Senegal's Atlantic coast. So these women were mothers, daughters, farmers, community leaders, and visionaries who made a living from harvesting mollusks, clams, crayfish, and other shellfish, and smoking and packaging these products. And they were stewards of the delicate and incredibly biodiverse mangrove forest in Fatigue, which is currently under pressure for deforestation from drought and from sea level rise. And part of how the folks that I was staying with contributed to mangrove reforestation was by also keeping bees in the ecosystem, which contributed to forestry growth and produced honey to produce and sell. But climate change was an ever-present stressor on the local economy and on people's daily lives, and on the life prospects of the women's children and grandchildren that I was working with. And the more that I saw the urgency of the climate crisis, the more I realized that it would be powerful to return to the root causes, to the political causes of this issue back in my own country and work in the political climate of the United States as an American citizen. And really look the US's continued love affair with fossil fuels and undemocratic, unjust energy economies in the eye and see if we could start from there to make a change. So after graduating from university, oh, and this is a picture of Fatu, who's one of the women that I worked with for 6 months, harvesting mollusks and clams, which are incredibly important to the ecosystem of Senegal, but which are also under threat from solidification and from erosion and sea level rise. And let's see if this changes. Oh, here we go. Let's go back. Nothing? You cut off. Well, anyway, I'll just use this as my background. So in 2016, I just want to have us recall a little bit what the political climate was like. It was the end of the Obama administration. We were incredibly excited about the new elections and thought that there could be a new wave. And I moved to New Hampshire to work with 350 Action, which is the political arm of 350.org, training and recruiting over 100 young people to talk to presidential candidates about climate change. And I had a photo of us talking to Hillary Clinton about fracking, but maybe I'll be able to show some of that later. So it's really incredible that in the US you can attend town halls with presidential candidates and speak to them about what's on your mind and give passionate appeals for justice. So our strategy at the time was to expose how money from the fossil fuel industry influenced Republican climate denial and to pressure Hillary Clinton to move left by showing that young voters supported progressive climate change policies. So everything from a nationwide ban on fracking to opposing the Keystone and Dakota Access pipelines. It was really hard work to train, recruit, and manage a team of young volunteers, but watching them actually approach Hillary Clinton and ask her if she would support a ban on fracking or if she opposed the Northeast Direct Pipeline was one of the most powerful things that I've ever done in my life. And Hillary didn't win, of course, but I'd like to think that all that work was not in vain. First, I saw how a committed group of young people could actually influence national politics. When Hillary Clinton announced her candidacy for president, she didn't even have a published climate plan. Her initial environmental stances included vague commitments to building 500 million solar panels and reducing oil consumption in the United States. But it didn't have the bold, visionary climate policy that we urgently know that we need and deserve. And by the end of the campaign, so after 8 months of going to every single campaign event and asking her if she would support this and this policy, she had moved to actually saying she supported a ban on fossil fuel extraction on public lands. We asked her over 10 times if she would commit to refusing money from the fossil fuel industry. And this became a huge sticking point in her campaign. And at one point, she even accused us of being shills from the Bernie campaign, pressuring her on fossil fuel money, and that made it to the New York Times and went viral. And that's because it's really sensitive, the Democratic Party's relationship with the fossil fuel industry, right? But by the end, she was vehemently denying that she took fossil fuel money. She would incorporated more climate justice language into her climate proposal, including a plan to transition coal communities to green new jobs. And of course, this was very far from perfect, and I'm talking about national level politics here. But I'd like to think that the young activists who visited her time and time again in New Hampshire had something to do with that. And of course, it was incredibly devastating when Trump won the election. But it was even more frustrating, I learned, to see the Democratic Party equivocate about whether or not they would oppose this administration full on, or if they would work with Trump. And so after the election, I was really tired after spending a year and a half working on 2016 and expecting Hillary to win at least so that our movements could continue to push her. But seeing Trump in office, we knew that we weren't able to pick the opponent that we wanted, right? So something I always say to folks I'm working with is that when movements approach elections, that we're not, when we vote with our feet and when we vote with the ballot, we're doing that actually to vote for our opponent. We're not doing that because we morally endorse everything that Hillary Clinton, for example, would do. Of course we do not, but we would rather pick an opponent such as Hillary or even Bernie over someone like Trump, and that's how we can be strategic in that small sphere. But after Trump won, of course, the Democrats were equivocating about their position. So I took action with a group of people called All of Us, which is now known as Justice Democrats, risking arrest and being arrested after Trump's inauguration in Chuck Schumer's office, who at the time was the Senate Minority Leader, protesting how Wall Street Democrats had failed the American people and urging the party to adopt stronger stances on everything from prison reform to financial reform, immigration justice, and climate justice. And I came to a point of reflection about the current state of the Democratic Party, recognizing that as a social movement activist, I would always be loyal to my community and the reality of the cause, but also realizing how important it was that we elect the people that we want to continue to push and be accountable to our movements. So I moved to Virginia, and I worked with Tom Perriello, who was a UN Special Envoy to the Republic of the Congo, negotiating a peace deal there right before the election, and then who ran and mounted a very powerful campaign for the governor of Virginia. He was the only candidate to oppose 2 frack gas pipelines, which are currently still slated to be built, and which people, incredible women on the ground, have been actually sitting in trees for the past couple of months to stop this pipeline from being constructed. We fought hard, but in the end, Tom didn't win. But the opportunity arose for me to direct Clean Virginia, which was a political action committee that funded candidates who refused money from the fossil fuel industry and supported local measures for energy democracy. And so, it isn't coincidental that in the state of Virginia, the largest public utility, Dominion Energy, has spent $11 million over the past decade on candidates, on Republicans and Democrats alike. And it isn't coincidental that they've gotten everything they wanted, including the green light to build a new frack gas pipeline from the Marcellus Shale of West Virginia down to export in the Chesapeake Bay. And so I never thought that I would direct anything like a political action committee in my entire life, but suddenly the opportunity was there. And so I was incredibly fortunate to be able to lean in and recruit candidates actually to take a pledge to refuse money from Dominion, from the fossil fuel industry. And right now there are 26 elected leaders and candidates in the state of Virginia who have taken this pledge, taken the Clean Virginia Pledge and the Activate Virginia Pledge. And working as the deputy director of that PAC, along with my colleague Brendan Gilmore, who was also on Tom's campaign, taught me a few really interesting lessons. The first was that money in politics is a huge problem that we don't talk enough about, I think, in the climate movement. But the more that you look at who is taking money from the industry, who is accepting money from the party that accepts money from the industry, the more you can understand why there are so many obstacles to climate action in Virginia. I learned that going up against one of the most entrenched political machines on the Eastern Seaboard means untangling an octopus web of political power, money, and prestige, and things are never clear-cut. The people you think would automatically be your allies are often tied up in other areas of their career, their community reputation, their future prospects, or their re-election campaigns to the powers that be, to Dominion Energy in this case. But as Judge Brandeis, Supreme Court Justice from the United States, said, sunlight is the best disinfectant. And the more that we were able to tell the story about how corruption and money in politics from the fossil fuel industry was hampering the opportunity to pass climate policies in Virginia, the more we were able to put pressure on these political candidates. And that was incredibly important. And so, although I'm currently on hiatus from my political work as I pursue my master's degree, I just want to uplift, in conclusion, the work of young people from the Sunrise Movement in the United States. I was so heartened to see many of my friends and colleagues sit in Nancy Pelosi's office a few weeks ago, and then also just a couple days ago, to promote the ambitious new policy proposal of the Green New Deal and risk arrest to actually do that. This legislation would involve implementing a massive public works program with the goal of radically overhauling the United States infrastructure to produce 100% renewable energy. And it would include also proposals like eliminating poverty and decreasing economic inequality through a federal jobs guarantee and a universal basic income measure. So it's these kinds of intersectional policies that we're seeing young people actually bring to the halls of power, to the US Congress, to the UN climate negotiations that really give me life and give me inspiration. So to conclude, I think that if there's a common theme throughout my work, it has been that the leadership of young people and women especially is crucial to promoting real transformative climate solutions. And my work, of course, has mostly focused on bringing the power of social movements to the electoral sphere and to holding our leaders accountable. And from influencing presidential climate policies to working at the state level in Virginia politics, I saw how ordinary people could actually shine a light on fossil fuel corruption that's occurring in our communities, and see how actually mobilizing people at the grassroots combined with strong advocacy, we were able to make a big dent in the direction of Virginia state politics and hopefully also the 2020 election in the United States and in the midterms as well. And so with that, I just want to say thank you to all of our incredible women panelists from all over the world. It's been incredible to learn about all of your work, and I so appreciate the diverse perspectives that we were able to bring to this panel. And now I'd like to open it up to the audience to ask questions. We have 30 minutes for questions, and we're really excited to hear from you. If you'd like to address our speakers individually or as a group, any of that would work. And just another shout out to our executive director, Osprey Lake, and Emily Arasi, who are on staff and aren't able to be with us here today, but who are incredible women leaders and have facilitated this panel and organized it. So thank you to both of you back in New Mexico and California. So without further ado, I'll pass the microphone now to the members of the audience for questions. If there are any questions, I have them.
Thank you for the panelists, it's incredible. I have a question for Carmen. It's fascinating, the agreement, the work we've been doing. I have a question about, you said this, if I understand correctly, this is an intergovernmental agreement, and you said it is binding. I wonder how it is translated into national and local level, whether there's procedural justice to put those perpetrators, bring them to justice. That's one question. And another question is, I see some of the countries in Latin America do not signatories on it, like Peru or Chile. Do you know what are the pullbacks from those countries?
Thank you very much for your question. Are we going to question and answer? Okay. Well, this is a binding agreement for the region of Latin America, the Caribbean, which is composed of 33 countries. And yes, under this agreement, government should guarantee human rights for human rights and environmental defenders. And there is all a number of procedures that's why it has to be signed and ratified, so the governments could start making laws in order to guarantee these rights to the local population under the sovereignty of every party. So there's a whole the other articles talk about how it's going to be implemented, and we would have like COPs, like the climate change COP, but for Principle 10, where we are going to be able to bring cases and evaluate and so on. But still, all this doesn't have a form until the countries sign and ratify. And of course, there is a number of countries that have not signed and ratified. Mostly, they are the countries that where lots of damage and harassment is going on through to environmental defenders, and it's because of the resources. But as I said earlier, we already have adopted this agreement. So it doesn't matter how long it takes, eventually it will be adopted. Like most of the agreements in UN, sometimes it takes a little bit more of time, sometimes it's quicker, depending on what's at stake. So here, it's lots that it's at stake, not only human rights, but natural resources, and the ability of people to fight for their natural resources. Therefore, it's a little bit complicated, but we are sure that we are going to make it to the point to have at least 11 countries and 11 ratifications that we need in order to set an example for more countries to join, and of course for more regions to join. Thank you.
my name is Mellon, and I'm an academic from Queen University of London, also a freelancer. And I wondered if you see any intersections with reproductive rights and justice in your work broadly, and if you could talk a little bit about what those might be, if you do see such intersections. Anyone or everyone.
I think that's a very interesting question, because I think there was a panel which unfortunately I was not able to attend about the silences around reproductive health justice and climate change. And of course, in other spaces within the United Nations, for example, the CSW, there's been a lot of conversations, at least that I've known in the last 4 or 5 years, around that kind of, those kinds of conversations. I think just to answer in a very narrow, not a broad way, those of us who come from the global south are very careful about conversations about reproductive health and justice. Because for the longest time, it wasn't even framed within a rights or justice framework. Eugenics was pushed. We come from generations of women and our ancestors where forced sterilizations, which actually still continue to happen in different forms in different parts of the global south. So for sure, I would suggest an approach to the issue of course, from a health, from a justice, from an economic freedom and justice perspective. That's absolutely necessary, because we do know that the gendered relations and power around, for example, access to resources, and also the labor that is performed, and how the silences around the care work that women perform are often counted out of mainstream economics. It's one of the, if I should use this term, one of the silences or blind spots of mainstream economics, which we need to counter. So I do think there needs to be more conversation about the link between the climate crisis and reproductive healthcare, justice, and also comprehensive sexuality education. But my hope is that it's not put within a corporate privatized framework, and that it's not another opportunity to push forward Malthusian, alien eugenics on women in the global south. Women demand, not just women, not just cis women also. I have to expand and expound on that. We need to also think carefully about what we talk about, who exactly fits into the category of women. I hope it's not within the binaries, the patriarchal binaries that we've had for a really long time. There's conversation for that, there's space for that, and I look forward to hearing these conversations.
It's interesting, because it's interesting being from New Zealand, where access to contraception is reasonably easy comparatively. Although at the moment we're currently trying to lift abortion out of the Crimes Act, because currently there's a lot of loopholes to jump through to be able to get an abortion. It's not a free choice thing at all. But I think particularly in kind of Western narratives, and this is coming from my background in anthropology, is this narrative around having a baby the right way. For it to be planned, for it to be managed, to be on contraception until you can intentionally put that thought through, and to only have a baby when it is financially doable, and you have the resources to be able to do that. Now, to be able to raise a child well does require certain resources. Of course, access of those resources are determined by a whole lot of prejudicial, systemic narratives and colonization, that kind of thing. I'm being very generic here. But more often than not, then access to contraception or kind of community programs around access to contraception are targeted towards communities where having an unplanned child is undesirable, because the state doesn't want to have to face that it might have to be able to provide some resource to help raise that child, which is the product of a situation of hundreds of years of colonization. That does fit into some of that eugenic stuff, right? Is targeting specific communities to have those children in a correct way, in a very kind of capitalist productivity framework, of being very sensible about it, which then undermines kind of our perspectives around children back home, which are they're an absolute joy.
and a lot of old conversations around, they were never disciplined, and vocalization, their enthusiasm was never to be disciplined, but to be channeled in the right way, and any child was a gift. And so I think there are a lot of broader narratives around contraception and access to contraception, and that fits into some of that demonizing narratives around different sectors or ethnicities, yeah.
I'll just say one thing on that while you pass the mic, which is that at least in my work with Clean Virginia, I was so heartened to see so many women freshman delegates to the Virginia State House, including Danica Roan, who's the first transgender woman to be elected to the State House in Virginia, as well as Elizabeth Guzman, who comes from Peru, but is also the first Peruvian American woman to be elected. And both of them have been outspoken advocates of reproductive rights in the state of Virginia, which last year saw a bill for transvaginal ultrasounds actually to be debated in the House. And this just shows that it's so intersectional. It's a question of actually electing more women and mobilizing finance, which was my role, to actually support the leadership of young women and new women and women of color to promote those issues and promote reproductive justice in their own communities.
Hi, my name is Elaine. I'm here with the Women in Gender constituency. I really appreciate the panel and the vast experiences of alternative organizing outside of these UN spaces, from coalition building to Indigenous organizing to using the Casa framework to art. And I think one alternative form of organizing that's never really talked about in these walls are people that pick up arms or the arms struggle. And so I was wondering, is that form of resistance that we're kind of seeing in Paris right now, is that kind of form of resistance welcomed into the environmental and feminist movement?
Well, for me, that's very appropriate question because actually yesterday in my country there was some takeovers of some public buildings because right now, well, the president wants to be elected again, and it's not kind of legal, but that's another story. But the thing is that with the movement that is opposing to that, we have agreed that it has to be in a peaceful way. We are against the use of guns and violence in any situation. And probably most of you don't know it, but actually, for example, Venezuela has right now more refugees than this, has generated more refugees than the Syria crisis. But we don't call them refugees because we're not calling it a war. We are trying to, in the region, to fight for democracy in many ways, which is getting very complicated, and we're trying to do it in a peaceful, non-violent way, but we're not getting very far with that. Anyway, it's, I think, for the region of Latin America, I'm not talking about the other regions, I think it's important to have that in mind, not to harm armed conflicts, because we have seen what had happened in Colombia for so many years, and we have learned so much lessons from that. So now our mobilizations are based on peace, are on the streets, and are based on solidarity among movements. Thank you.
I'd like to answer that question by a quote from the Indian feminist, wonderful revolutionary comrade called Aotearoa. In an interview she had a few years ago, and she says that nonviolence is a piece of theater. You need an audience. What can you do when you have no audience? I think it's important, I mean, like Carmen, I'm careful about the question of violence, because the thing is this, violence eventually affects all of us. And in its own ways, it does dehumanize all of us. But at the same time, I think it's also important to contextualize violence in its political and its economic context. The state has a monopoly over violence. The police and the military have a monopoly over violence. When we talk about economic injustice, when we often when we talk about violence, we think about violence in the sense that someone taking a gun and shooting you or stabbing you or beating you up. But not being able to have food is violence. Not being able to have healthcare is violence. Having to breathe dirty water, having dirty air, and not having access to water is violence, and it's very important. And that's something that's actually missing within the halls of the United Nations, where we have to look at the climate crisis as violence in very many multiple ways, you know? So it's not just this particular type of violence, because I think that it's a very reductionist way to look at violence in that particular way. We have to look at the entirety of violence. But again, to go back to Aotearoa, I'm a pacifist when needed. That's my stand. I would rather live in a world where people do not take up arms, for sure. But again, as Aotearoa says, people have a right to resist annihilation if needed, but that should be a very last resort. We shouldn't get to a world where the first thing we do when there's conflicts is take up arms against one another. It's a very dangerous world to live in.
Great, I think we have time for one last question. I think I saw one more hand.
That was a hand on the back, I think. Oh, it's Resistencia Pacífica No Violenta. Resist, non-violent resist, peaceful non-violent resistance. I can never get that in English well.
I had a question for any of the panelists who wanted to answer. Given that we're in this space, the COP24 space that is so few and in between and real solutions, and a lot of these negotiations are furthering the crises that we are trying to change. I'm curious what other avenues of change give you all hope or inspire you that you see some, you feel excited to engage with after COP?
Well, I was just speaking with Alberto Sandoval today, which some of you know from the Indigenous Environmental Network, and we appeared in a few places speaking about a condition or a situation that is coming to the forefront, which is geoengineering or climate engineering, crazy magic wand efforts to roll back climate change, pretty scary stuff that we feel like we need to stop. And so I've been following that thread as much as I can here. And Alberto said to me, and he's been to many COPs, like the most important thing we're doing here is what we're doing here, that we're getting the word out, that we're still here, that we're more than still here, we're super here. And that's the most important work. And he is following the negotiations and has for years. But that's what he said, and he said this is what gives us hope. This is what makes, he said he felt it was very helpful to him to be on the panels that he was on. And so that's what is giving us hope, is that we still are having our voices, and that all of us are here amplifying each other's message, learning from each other, and strengthening all of our work in this way. And that seems to be what this COP is about for a lot of us. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to uplift another project of Weekends, the Women Speak project, which is an online catalog and database of over 2,000 entries from women all around the world who are implementing gender-just climate solutions in their own communities. So I'd love to turn to that at times when I'm not sure about the UN process. So with that, I think we're out of time, but thank you so much to all of our incredible panelists. Thank you to the audience for being here with us. I wish you all the best in these last couple of days of the COP, and please feel free to come up and ask us other questions. And with that, I'd just like to conclude and say thank you so much.